we will be talking a bug which sounds scary, but not scary at all, depending on how you're looking at it. And it is both hilarious and scary at the same time. Let me introduce myself. So this is my first time to the Rome Hack conference and also my first time to Italy. I feel very good here. And I currently work with a company that specializes in network defense in factories. They hired me to basically break stuff, so I broke stuff. That's why I'm here. I gave talks at other conferences around the world. And so, as the topic says, SSL VPNs, and people may be asking, why are you looking into SSL VPNs? That is because I have to pick topics for my research. So I tend to pick remote, high-value, and high-profile targets. That would mean that the targets must have a great market share, must be used everywhere by everyone. And it appears, SSL VPN seems to match the profile. And yes, it does have a multiple track record, which astonishes me. So today, we will be talking about how to break the firewall rules in 4 out of 6 major VPNs. And since I was like a caveman, I barely use technology at all. My notebook is a physical notebook, no iPads. So to me, SSL VPN is a new stuff. To me, in the beginning, there were no VPNs at all. Teleworking was hard, like in the early 10s or early 2000s. And imagine connecting to the VPNs was a great hassle. So for example, this is the interface from the KDE, and the KDE team did a great job making setting up VPN easier. So for example, if you want to set up an IPsec VPN, you have to figure out what settings your IT person has set in the company. So you will spend a great amount of time trying to figure out settings and like, why does this not work at all? And you will be angry. So, and then someone came out with something called SSL VPN, new stuff, magically traverses through firewalls. Yes, it does wonders because it takes human factor into account. So most VPN nowadays, they do some kind of zero configuration stuff. So they actually tell you the parameters once you're signed in, and your computer will take that configuration and sign into a VPN. However, since 2021, the US NSA and CISA actually recommended against using SSL VPNs. So, citing from them, avoid selecting non-standard VPN solutions, including a class of products related to secure socket layer, transport layer security VPNs. Well, they are actually correct, because these products, they actually include custom and non-standardized features. And as all of the SSL VPNs, they are not standardized. They all implement their own rules and protocols. Well, this sounds something very easy to mess up. And that's true. So calling back to Orange High, he was here like a couple years ago, speaking about SSL VPN box. We can see those vendors are writing their codes like maybe in the 1990s. Imagine, why will you write a code that crashes when you put a lot of A's inside? And like, why are you writing codes with like, you can do directory traversal? Well, I don't get it, but that is in their products back in 2019. And that habit continues today. So for example, there's a great write-up by the Watchtower team on a bug by Fortinet in 2022. The first stage of exploitation is put a bunch of A's. Why the hell are you still writing codes like that way? So we don't understand, but we can know that SSL VPN security are pretty bad. And how bad is it? Take out your phones or your laptops, go on DuckDuckGo or Google, try to search SSL VPN CPE RCE, and you can find a bunch of results, so you can know, SSL VPNs are out for like half or nearly a decade. And every year, you keep hearing like your information security person inside the company saying, we have to patch our VPNs. And those vendors will sometimes come out with new features like baseline enforcements. And their baseline enforcements are not very well thought out. So it is actually pretty easy to bypass any of their new features. So we have a few insights. One, most SSL VPNs are web-based bugs. There are no tunnel-based bugs. There are no protocol-based bugs. So time for something else. And two, is this the 90s? People are still writing code like in the 90s. They appear to be writing under influence. Well, so we know that no one has looked into protocols before, so we can take advantage of that. Two, we know that most vendors implement their own protocol and protocol stack and communication flow. This sounds like a recipe for disaster, and yes. So our key questions: one, can we compromise an SSL VPN appliance or a product via terminal interface from remote? Two, can we affect integrity or trustability of an SSL VPN tunnel? And in order to understand this SSL VPN tunnel, we actually have to perform deep reverse engineering on both the server and the client side. Well, for client side, it is pretty easy to obtain. You just put in Google like X VPN client, file type exe, file type tar.gz or whatsoever, and you will magically get a client package. And the best part about the client package is they are not bound to any specific firewall. They're bound to the brand or the protocol. So once you, for example, if you have a Palo Alto client from maybe your college, then you can use it for your work or whatever else. The difficult part is the server. We have to actually find a way to obtain those server binaries. And we need to understand those SSL VPN tunnel mechanisms. So how? Yes, I'm doing the research as my company sponsored me to do this research, but I cannot spend like tens of thousands of dollars on all SSL VPN appliances. Well, imagine our finances will like kill me for that. So the golden question is how to obtain a server. Are you a Bruce Wayne? Apparently I am not. If you are a Bruce Wayne, then you can definitely buy every appliance, tear them apart, and maybe burn it up, read their hard drives. If you're poor like me, well, you can try their new tech called virtual machines or appliances. And how do you get a virtual machine or appliance? Well, you don't have to pay like over $10,000 for that. You only have to go to, like, for example, Amazon EC2 Marketplace. You can actually rent them by hour, or some vendors actually have a trial program. You can sign up and use their product for 30 days. So you can have a virtual machine. And how does the SSL VPN connection flow works? As I said, that most vendors do implement some kind of zero configuration flow. So when you want to connect to an SSL VPN tunnel, you usually log in, like you type in your account and password. You log in, request connection over HTTPS, and authenticate. Once authenticate passes, and by the way, most of the previous SSL VPN bugs happened before this stage. Since the authentication flow happens around HTTP APIs, it is very common for vendors to misimplement their APIs. And once you authenticate, the server will send connection information over that HTTPS connection. Once the client has received that connection, it will rely on that information to create the tunnel, and the tunnel will be created like anything over TLS. That is why the namesake SSL VPN tunnel. And how does this SSL VPN tunnel works? We actually looked into all major SSL VPN vendors, and all vendors do implement their tunnel like this. So from the most outside ring will be DTLS. D stands for running on UDP. It can both run on UDP and TCP. And inside, they will just maybe use PPP or ESP protocol, which is some kind of layer 2 VPN protocols. And they will wrap it in their own proprietary protocol header and land an IP packet. So we can say SSL VPN is basically tunneling an entire layer 3 protocol over TLS. And how does this look like exactly? So we actually looked into those vendors' tunneling protocols, and we basically wrote an, let's say, compatible version in Python So you can actually use this code to connect to, well, since the vendor's name is on there, this VPN, but we actually have created for most implementations. And by the way, we do plan to open source this in GPL 2, yes. But I have to actually discuss with legal, and I'm still pushing for that. And you can see like the vendor actually has implemented their own magic header. In front end, you can see the Ethernet type, which may look very familiar, and the other stuff. So basically, they're stuffing an entire IP header inside the TLS tunnel. And how do you use this? Well, you just send it. That's simple. So that's how the building industry works. And what happens does a client tries to tunnel traffic over SSL VPN? Once you have connected to this tunnel, your client will create a physical network interface on your system. For Linux, it is usually another networking interface. So it will create a route to use that route as default. And once traffic has pumped through that virtual interface, your client will do some kind of encapsulation, which means they go back and put that magic header and stamp it through the DTLS tunnel and throw it to a server. And what happens when the server receives SSL VPN traffic? This is our guess at that moment because we didn't completely reverse engineer the whole stack from the beginning. Like imagine like there's some vendors like combining all of their services into one binary, and the IDA profile for that binary is like 800 megabytes. So we did not reverse engineer through all of the implementations. But to our understanding, like most SSL VPN servers, when they receive an incoming traffic, they try to validate that traffic and do de-encapsulate, so which means they take off their vendor layer and check if the packet source and destination matches firewall rules, and if matches, route it and send it. So we have a little test bed. We actually do not want to spend time re-implementing those connections, like zero configuration stuff. So the way we did it is we actually combined our script with the Python project man-in-the-middle proxy. So we use our client with a genuine SSL VPN client to connect to this proxy, to the VPN server, and through our script, we inject legitimate SSL VPN packets. So that's how we test. And we decided to fast because we know very little about the protocol. So we decided to ask Goddess of Luck. We throw all of the fields into PyRoDAMSA and sleep for a couple of weeks. And it turns out to be not very effective because there are some vendors, upon receiving an embedded packet, will straightly crash and disconnect all SSL VPN clients, which is why. And some of the vendors will just close the tunnel if it receives an embedded packet. So the fuzzing is not very effective, but at least it works. And as our fuzzing has gone not very successful, we tried to test the impossible during fuzzing. There's a field called IP source. What if we change it to something funny? And it turns out, OK, it appears that my social credit has gone through hell because we have 6 vendors in our testbed, and 4 out of 6 vendors accepted our forged packets. So as we change the source packet to anything else, the SSL VPN server receives a packet and deems the packet valid and sends it out to the network behind the SSL VPN appliance. And the best part is the monitored mode on affected vendors do show the packet coming from the forged IPs. So we know that we have a bug that breaks firewall and routing rules, which is quite astonishing. And for the bug, we actually dubbed it as VPN Gremlin. So why this name? It is like a gremlin or a goblin is inside those VPN routing rules and messing up with routing rules. When you write in firewall and routing rule, you will believe that that rule will not be broken. The firewall will do the stuff you told it to do. But in this case, the gremlin made it not to do the correct stuff. This is, in fact, an user impersonation and firewall rule bypass on multiple SSL VPNs. And there's a major caveat with the bug. As like most spoofing type bugs, we can only talk but cannot listen. So how do we work from that? That would be the golden question of this bug. So the question turns into, do we have a bug, into how do we escalate the bug? First thing, our man-in-the-middle proxy plus SCAPI tool looks clunky, as like reconnecting to the terminal requires us to restart the man-in-the-middle proxy every time, since it uses an informal key that we have to pull off from the firewall every time. Can we somehow make this process easier? Answer is yes. With these two commands, free, you can actually break SSL VPN firewall and routing rules. So how it works is you put your victim's IP inside. Like you try to become whoever you want. You just add the IP to the physical interface and start sending out packets with that IP. Then the firewall accepts that packet as valid. Great. So it is like 2 lines to break a billion-dollar industry. So we should have a small demo, but I believe the demo will not be very understandable. So let's try if this works, since I'm running PowerPoint on Linux. So even though we used one of the vendors as a POC, we actually have 4 different POCs which follow the same flow. So on all device tested, we use either a single or a multi-interface setup, and we all set the firewall rule as user can only reach target 0, and user 1 can reach target 1. That is very common in most network setups, so maybe you will have a weak network segment or a sensitive network segment, and you don't want anyone to touch that segment, so you close it off. But in this case, we can actually break into the sensitive segment. So on the top left, we have client 0, and on the top right, we have target 0. And like client 1, target 1, usually the client 0 can never reach target 1, and client 1 can never reach target 0. But in our case, we can actually break this assumption. So this is so I'm getting a bit slow in the demo, but let's wait. So I shall be running the attack script soon to inject packets into target 1. So it looks like I was running TCP dump at the moment. Let's try speed it up a little bit. OK, so it's finally getting to the point where I actually run the attack script. So let's run the attack. And now you can magically see why client 0 is able to send packets into target 1. And even better, the client 1 actually receives a reply from target 1. It is because that we are sending an ICMP ping request from client 0 to target 1, and target 1 actually sends the valid request back to client 1. So in this case, we actually broke the firewalling rule. And we have an even better one at the end of this POC. And in this case, the firewall actually thinks that our forged packets are valid and be coming from our spoofed target, which means that we can send packets at client 0 and having the firewall think that our packets are coming from client 1, which is very good. This can definitely escape network monitoring, like we have a scapegoat. So let's get back to the slides. Great, it works. So what actually happened with the demo? Because the demo is not very understandable, we shall consider this classic network design. So in most corporate networks, some of the corporates, they will put gateway and VPNs together as one device, but with very large enterprises, sometimes it will become 2 devices. This doesn't matter with this POC. But for clarity, we split it up in 2 in this presentation. So considering that you have a network, you have the main gateway, you have a VPN appliance behind the gateway, with the gateway exposing the VPN appliance to the outer world. And you have 2 networks. You have a network called network A. You have a network called network B. And you segment things by network. For example, you separate like R&D network from financial web network, and you separate management network from either the financial or the R&D network. And your assumption will always be that different networks can never reach each other. However, in our case, we can actually break this assumption. And more to say, when you are designing such network infrastructures, you will assume that some of the unpatchable or vulnerable or sensitive devices, you can place them safely inside the sensitive segment. In this case, we say it is network B. And you will assume that device will never be hacked by anyone else because only a selected few elites in your company can actually reach that device. In our case, we can prove different. So by applying our attack, usually you will assume that no one can actually reach the protected network. But applying our attack, we can actually break this boundary and step into another network. So how serious is it? And we have to perform some investigation. So a few caveats with this bug. 1, we have to actually be authenticated into the tunnel. But considering that spear phishing is commonly seen and commonly successful in large enterprises, so it would be very great for attackers if they can basically escalate privileges in their VPN tunnels. So imagine an attacker being successful to spearfish an intern, and the intern has VPN access, and attackers uses this bug to escalate the intern's access to like either IT or financial network. And we know that this is a one-way bug, so we call it a off-path blind attack. But can we write any arbitrary source IP? We should investigate it. We know that SSO-VPN are layer free, so we cannot do any ARP or DHCP spoofing. But if we are able to, then we can turn this into a very powerful primitive, especially with standards nowadays that prohibit bit tunneling. That means like every device is once connected to SSO-VPNs must tunnel all of their traffic through the VPNs. And question 2. We can surely inject packets with source, but can we perform an entire, like, for example, DNS spoofing? And can we perform attacks on any ICMP and UDP devices? For this one, I can already say yes. They do exist, the bugs that runs on ICMP or UDP. For example, like Windows is pretty bad in handling IPv6, so there are numerous IPv6 either Stack Overflow-based bugs on like Windows. And there are several protocols actually runs on UDP and ICMP and only requires like 1 or 2 packets to successfully attack and overtake the device. So for the last question, yes, we can actually perform attacks on any ICMP or UDP-based devices. Sorry. So the question, how can we write any arbitrary source IPs? No, because there's a Gandalf saying that I cannot pass. The reason is that most firewalls perform some kind of NATM routing, and it does check routing tables. So if I haven't connected to this SSL VPN, I don't have that IP, and I cannot use that IP because it requires my IP to be in the routing table to perform routing for me. So in this case, we are actually limited to any connected clients. So we cannot create IP address out of thin air. We must spoof someone has been connected to the VPN tunnels. And how about the possibility for DNS hijacking? Because most blind TCP off-path attack. So off-path means that you are next to the network that you are trying to attack. For example, if you are trying to hijack your, let's say, your colleague's connection, we call it an off-path attack because you're not your colleague's router or switch or something, so you're off-path. And most blind TCP off-path attacks will require you to perform some kind of either leaking or DNS hijacking. And for DNS hijacking, we think it is highly impossible, even though Dan Kaminsky has claimed possible on Black Hat maybe back in 2008. But to perform a DNS hijacking nowadays, you need to bet against 2 times 35565, which is nigh impossible. So what can we effect? We can attack against any protocol on status L3 inside protected network. And this evades network monitoring because the gateways actually accepts our packet as valid. We can send out legit packets from spoof IP. This also escapes network segmentation and routing restrictions. We basically punch a wall in their firewall rules, like saying all of your firewall rules are null and invalid. But with one major caveat, we need to know the target and victim's IP. So we will assume this bug will be very useful for like red team engagements or for those nation-state attackers already having a complete map of their network. Well, and we can also give a few attack scenarios as for example. So they are actually some kind of one-shot DOS attacks. So for example, if an attacker managed to spearfish someone with access in network A, and he knows like where network B is, well, he can one-shot and memcache request to the memcache on and protect the network, and he can actually set anyone as a victim. And 2, it is possible for the corporate ITs to place multiple devices inside protected network. And it is very often for those devices to have a vulnerable networking stack or a vulnerable service that is able to be compromised with one shot. So for example, we know there are some services that runs on either SNMP or ICMP or UDP that is vulnerable to these kind of attacks. So we can actually one-shot through this network barrier and overtake that device and started to pivot from there. And don't even forget that we can actually escape network monitoring in this case. And like example 3 is the one I said impossible, because you have to perform DNS spoofing, and we don't think this setup is quite possible. We wouldn't understand that why would anyone design their network like this, because it requires you to have your DNS server inside the VPN tunnel. So if you somehow set up a DNS server inside the VPN tunnel, then yes, we maybe can spoof responses by the DNS server inside VPN. We may be able to spoof DNS responses by using this attack. But we don't think this is quite possible, because who the hell will put a DNS server inside VPN? And why does this happen? We found out like 4 out of 6 vendors failed to validate encapsulated IP address before forwarding. Why? So we actually checked that most vendors just, upon receive of an SSL VPN traffic, they will just de-encapsulate and go straight, check firewall rules. If this IP header's source and destination matches, then we go to routing table and send it. They don't perform any checking. They don't check if the encapsulated IP headers matches the connected client's address. So that is why this happened. So now the sad part. Like I said, we have a simple bug which only requires 2 lines in command line to break VPN firewall and routing rules. We have a bug affecting multiple vendors, and they are of the same attack method, which means if one vendor fixing the bug and gave too much information, which we do not have control over at all, we cannot control how the vendors will write their advisories. So if a vendor accidentally gave too much information while they are fixing it, they will actually leak enough information for anyone to abuse the bug. And now we have to actually work across 4 vendors. So how do we do that? So for me, I consulted the CISA from the United States, and their recommendation is, as the bug doesn't have a very high CIA, like someone claimed that having a world eating Linux bug recently, and they don't think the bug is being used in the wild. So we may not need coordinated disclosure at the moment. And in our case, we already have a vendor jump the gun and came up with advisory before anyone reacted. I'm not sure how to react to that, but we don't need coordinated disclosure in this case. So we have a very bizarre disclosure timeline. So we actually found a bug maybe back in April 2023. Yes, 1.5 years from today. This is actually the first time we present this bug in public. We notified CISA because we don't know how to actually work with 4 vendors at the same time. There are some vendors that is not working with CISA or in the VINS platform, so we have to contact them by ourselves. So there was a vendor already pushed out with the bugs in 4 months. That is quite impressive, considering that you have to thoroughly test all network products. So I have to mention that the dates put on here does not represent the exact date that the vendor have fixed or accepted the bug. So it is possible, and it did happen, that some vendors will quietly fix a bug in previous version, then publish an advisory. So when you see that advisory, the bug has been fixed maybe 1 or 2 versions ago, depending on how the vendor assessed the bug. But to our point of view, there are some vendors that they are taking very long. There are some vendors which appears to be network ninjas, but their ninja took a year to fix the bug. So the total time taken is 10 months, which we wouldn't understand because it is a very simple check in their de-encapsulation phase. So we have actually learned many from this project, and we also do have some conclusions. So one, we understand deeply right now is that we cannot tie so we used to research on devices, create some bugs, report them, and work with a vendor to fix the bugs, then publish it. Now we cannot rely on the vendor's time to response reliability right now because for this case, we initially thought that it was a very simple bug and it took 10 months. And from outside, we cannot even talk about it before every vendor has fixed and published advisory, so we're pretty much relaxed. And we now know that designing a cross-layer protocol is very difficult and prone to error, and we have proved it. So for SSL VPN, it is actually a cross-layer protocol. You have to authenticate through HTTPS APIs to get the connection information, and then you have to somehow create an internal through either through TCP or UDP, and through POS, and through another layer and vendor's layer, and then the IP header. That is 4 or 5 layers inside it. So we know that creating cross-layer protocols is difficult and prone to having errors. So now we understand why the NSA and CISA will recommend against using SSL VPNs back early in 2021. So let us sink in. So Orange was here like maybe 2019 when he found the SSVPN bugs. And in 2021, the CISA and the NSA came out with a joint recommendation saying that you shall not use SSVPNs. And today, people are still using it. And even funnier that there are some vendors, when you go to set up SSVPNs, there will be a dialog saying, we do not recommend SSVPN anymore. Please use IPsec. Well, that's true. There's a vendor having this dialog inside. And we have found that most networking or edge devices, because of, likewise found our other researchers, they are becoming more complex. Like, for example, all of the vendors, they actually have laid out their products like a heavy modified Linux kernel with like very complex networking stack. We don't even understand fully of how that works. So we can safely say that those devices are becoming more complex and more prone. And even in the real-world cases, there are cases that attackers are leveraging such devices' complexity, and turn them against you. And most important one, we know that simple hack works. We do not need fancy fuzzing layers. We only need 2 lines in the command line to break routing rules. And since RoamHack has around 40% of defenders here, I feel like it is very imperative that I shall mention some mitigations for the defenders. So it is not very hopeless for defenders. If you laid out your network to be resilient, to ensure that if an equipment doesn't do its job and your network wouldn't be overtaken, then you will be safe. So one of the ideas behind this is maybe you can try to implement zero trust networking, but what happens if someone takes zero trust networking off? We don't know, but that is one of the ways we can recommend right now. And you have to really remind that bugs like our VPN Gremlins is able to punch through your network boundaries. It is only one of the attacks being able to do it. There are several other bugs in the wild that is able to punch through network boundaries. And we felt that we need to emphasize the importance of network behavior monitoring. So if you are doing network behavior monitoring, you know that the client shall not normally be accessing those sensitive equipment, even if the traffic was spoofed, but you can still somehow tell by network behavior monitoring. So there will be some reference materials. We plan to publish a full write-up on this bug, maybe in late October, because we have to go through legal for that. And we plan to open source our fuzzing script at the same time. And you can also consult on how the US National Security Agency recommended to lay out your network infrastructure. So that will conclude my talk. And I also do have cats, and I can safely say that every equipment that this cat touched are unsafe.
Okay. Thank you very much for your talk, Talun. So we have a couple of questions from the audience here. So first question, should allow this as firewall rules resolve the vulnerability of one network talking with another?
No, not at all, because it is very unwise to rely on those simple source and destination rules right now anymore, because bugs like VPN Gremlins, or it is possible for clients to be compromised in some way. And in that way, you cannot verify if the request really comes from that employee anymore. You shall not recommend solely on that. You shall combine multiple defenses at the same time.
So even protection at the application layer.
Right.
Yeah. Another question. Was there any effort by the VPN companies to investigate whether this has been exploited in the wild before, given that the attack escapes regular monitoring?
If he is referring to how the vendors are detecting if it has been exploited in the wild,
yes.
Their official answer is no. But I don't think there is a good way for them to detect this kind of attack.
Yeah. Okay. That's it for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.